Welcome back, everybody. I am the Silver Watchman, and this is Dead Cells, episode 56. Is it 56? Yes, it is episode 56. So, I really hope that you guys have had an absolutely fantastic week, because we're going to read the Bible. And it'll be while I am decimating everything in my path. Yeah. Seriously, though, I really hope that you guys had a fantastic week. So, today we are just reading Acts chapter 23, as this is another dense chapter that needs a lot of dedicated breakdown. It is not like chapters 21 and 22, which have to be read together in order to have the proper context to understand what is being said. Technically, the entire Bible needs to be read together to understand the context of what's being said. But even then, you kind of don't need... So anyway, I'm going to begin now. Acts chapter 23, King James Version of the Bible. And Paul earnestly, beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee. Thou whited wall, for sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. When he had said so, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit. But the Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great cry. And the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel have spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take him by force from among them, and to bring him into the castle. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul. For as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And there were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders, and said, We have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now, therefore ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, wherever he come near, are ready to kill him. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, Bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him, and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who hath something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand, and went with him aside privately, and asked him, What is it that thou hast to tell me? And he said, The Jews have agreed to desire thee, that thou wouldest bring Paul down tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath, that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young man depart, and charged him, See thou tell no man that thou hast shewed these things to me. And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 60, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide them beasts, that they may set Paul on, and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter after this manner. Claudius Lysias unto the most excellent governor Felix sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army, and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of the law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers, also to say before thee that they had against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. On the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him, and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. All right, so this is Acts chapter 23. There's a lot that's happening right now, so after the intermission, I'm going to come back and I'm going to break down this chapter in detail. All right. I shall return. And I am back. So, we're going to kick off the chapter, the breakdown at least. So, in the very first verse of chapter 23, we see Paul, the aftermath of chapter 22, which is Paul saying, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. Essentially saying, I am guiltless because I've been spreading the word of God, which caused Ananias, the high priest, that was next to, to command the guys that were next to him, hit him in the mouth. Oh, is that a spider? Oh, that is a spider. I mean, it's dead. Okay, sorry, I got distracted. So, why did Ananias command this? Simple. It conflicted with his worldview. A common tactic of the enemy is, if you are saying something contrary to the narrative that the enemy wants, the enemy is going to do anything in their power to silence you. But I love Paul's response here in verse 3. And said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law. Basically saying, you're a hypocrite. Now, there's a term here that is without context in our language. And we're going to look up what whited wall means. Whitewashed wall. Oh, okay, yeah. I hit the nail on the head. A person who appears to look good but isn't. So the best example I have to give for you guys, that would be the equivalent of a whited wall. Would be a painted rust bucket. Or a polished dull knife. Or a bent trumpet. I mean, you can still play a bent trumpet. A bent, polished trumpet. There we go. So essentially, he's saying, you're trying to judge me according to the law. But while you're judging me, you're defying it. And what is the law? The 10 Commandments. As well as some other rules that were mentioned in Deuteronomy that I cannot currently remember off the top of my head. And their response is typical. We see this in verse 4. They that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Which causes Paul to respond with, Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. So what is the meaning of that little interaction right there? Well, essentially, the equivalent of the high priest would have to be somebody like a deacon in a Catholic church, or the Pope. So when they say revilers, so what they're saying is, do you hate the high priest? So when Paul says he was the high priest, for it is written, who is he mentioning? Is it the guy that the other people were mentioning, which is Ananias, or is he talking about Jesus? Well, considering Paul's personality and the context of what's being said here, Paul is talking about Jesus, while the other people that are nearby him are talking about Ananias. But this is also an interesting moment. In verse 6, Paul notices the fact that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees. Now, let's look up, once again, what is a Sadducee and what is a Pharisee? Let's see. Sadducees. Another word for them was Zadokites. The Sadducees were and this is from GodQuestions.org, were an aristocratic class connected with everything going on in the temple in Jerusalem. They tended to be wealthy and held powerful positions. They were a priestly sect, high priests, and wealthy. And what we see later on in the chapter. All right, and I have to also look up Pharisees so you guys can have that as well. So essentially, the Sadducees were the high priests that came from wealthy families, while the Pharisees here we are. Pharisees in the Bible. Were a large influential sect of first country Jews known for their strict adherence to the Torah and oral traditions. They were more dedicated to the law than the Sadducees were. But what separated the Pharisees from the Sadducees is that the Pharisees believed in the resurrection, which is what we see later on in the chapter, whereas the Sadducees did not. And we see this division in verse 7. And the multitude was divided. In verse 8, it continues, for the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. The Pharisees were more in the word than the Sadducees were. The Sadducees brought the wealth. And they were the ones that were kind of, I'm trying to find a good modern day equivalent. Kind of like a sponsor for the temple. Or, hold on. Let's see. Like somebody that could lobby the government. Like somebody that was rich. So in verse 9, we see them starting to disagree amongst each other due to the words that Paul was saying. And I quote, and there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or angel have spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Meaning that they recognize that there's something more going on here. In verse 10, we see this. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and to bring him into the castle. So, the chief captain now is there just observing all this happen. I'm pretty sure he's seen some stuff in the past where he sees, okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. If I don't take this guy out, these guys are going to eventually stop arguing amongst each other and they're going to turn on him. But he is a Roman and he has broken no laws of our laws, the Roman laws. So there's no reason for him to be captive. So I'm guessing he sent soldiers in there. Yeah. Commanded soldiers to go down and to take him by force. What did that look like? It was probably... They probably came in, split the crowd, surrounded Paul, ushered him out, leaving the Sadducees and the Pharisees there to argue amongst each other. And I love this. In verse 11, we see that God approaches him and essentially encourages him, saying, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also in Rome." Another way of saying, yeah, this is just the beginning. You have done well. So the next day after that, we see this in verse 12. Certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying they would neither eat nor drink till they have killed Paul. Now, food is very important. Essentially what they were doing is they were taking an oath of fasting until they completed a task. But it doesn't call it fasting. It says that they're putting themselves under a curse. Now, so we can better understand what is being said, we're going to look up the definition of a curse. Curse, a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on someone or something. A coarse or blasphemous word or phrase used to express anger or other strong emotion. Yeah, I've done that. I've definitely done that. I'm more temperamental than I should be. But that's besides the point. In the verb context, it is to invoke or use a curse against. The secondary definition is use coarse or blasphemous language to express anger or other strong emotion. That is the exact same thing. So, it would have to be closest to what's being described in there. It would have to be the first definition, a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on someone or something. Now, as somebody that has used curses in the past, to curse people to death, I can tell you this. Think of a curse like, kind of like a verbal contract or a written one. If it is not fulfilled, then whatever would happen, whatever curse you're trying to throw onto somebody else gets thrown back onto you, up to tenfold. Which is why curses are a very dangerous thing to work with. So the fact that these Jews banded together and bound themselves via an oral curse saying that we are not going to eat or drink until they have killed Paul. Knowing God, essentially what God allowed to happen is that, let's see. Paul's sister's son was in the presence of that and heard what was said. So, what does he do naturally? Well, he goes to the chief. The chief captain. And essentially relays their plan. It's like, hey, they're going to try to get Paul out here. Do not let him out under any circumstance. Because they have pretty much said an oath that if he comes out again, they're going to kill him. Now, before I leave, I'm going to note this. Anytime you stand against the enemy is either going to try to silence you, and if they can't silence you, they're going to try to kill you. Now, I've experienced this since getting saved. I know it's going to get worse as I get more vocal about the word of the Lord. Reading the word, breaking it down, and I get a larger following, thanks to the Lord. Do not be afraid of what these people can do to you. Because at the end of the day, the worst they can do is break your body. But guess what? You honor God, you serve him, and even if you die for him, you're going to get a new body. And it's going to be perfect. What does that mean? It's not going to be able to be harmed. You won't age. You won't feel hunger. You could still eat, though. But you're not going to have to eat. You would have a perfect level of digestion. You won't get sick with that body. I'm pretty sure I already said you don't age. So, essentially, the rest of the chapter is the captain of the guard just making a plan to keep Paul from being assassinated. But this is also showing us a clear distinction between the Sadducees, which is the high influential aristocrats in power that are affiliated with the temple, and the Pharisees, which are the people that stay in the word, at least in the Torah, the Old Testament, that would be for us. And they sit there and they study it and they try to understand. But if we notice throughout the entire New Testament, it's a combination of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. But we also see that the Pharisees acknowledge who Jesus is. They know who he is. They just don't want to lose their power. They don't want to lose their pull. Why? Because the Sadducees have a lot of pull with them. So, we can say this, and it's most likely that a lot of these origins of the problems of this come from the Sadducees, come from the wealthy, the rich. And what does the Bible say about the wealthy and rich? Well, it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. Because what the devil does is the more money you have, the more comfortable you are, the easier it is to not rely on God. And it's a very dangerous place to be. Now, God will still bless his people. But I've run out of time for this episode, so I'd like to thank you all for watching. Glory be to God. Blessings be upon every single one of you. And this is the Silver Watchman signing out. Have a good rest of your day, everybody, and please be safe out there. And meditate on this.